The church bell didn't ring when he walked into town, his boots caked with the dust of 730 days. Faces turned away, not from hate, but from the quiet shame of forgetting. His house loomed ahead, the front door ajar, swaying in the wind. He stepped forward, heart pounding like artillery, knowing the real battle was about to begin, convincing them he was still home. The bus dropped him off 5 miles from town. No one was waiting, not that he expected anyone to. The driver didn't even ask if he needed help with the duffel bag. Just a nod and the hiss of the door opening to cold. James Holt stepped off and adjusted the strap over his shoulder. His boots hit the dirt with a soft crunch. Montana air had always felt heavier than anywhere else he'd been, wet with pine and something hollow like a bell that had stopped ringing long ago. There wasn't much to see. A grain silo in the distance, 2 street lamps flickering unevenly, and a long, narrow road that led toward a neighborhood he hadn't said aloud in almost 2 years. He started walking, slow, like someone retracing a path he didn't quite trust anymore. The bag on his back was lighter than the one he'd carried through Kandahar, but it pulled at him differently. Not from weight, from memory. A toothbrush, a photograph with the corner creased, a key that might not fit anymore, and tucked in one pocket, something he didn't tell the VA counselor about. A small, cheap stuffed fox from a gas station. The same kind he used to see his daughter, Ellie, dragging around by the tail when she was 4. The moon slipped behind a veil of thin clouds. And James walked on. He passed the diner that used to serve burnt coffee and cherry pie that was too sweet. It had new signage now, sleeker, colder. No one inside looked up as he paused outside the window. He watched for a beat, just strangers chewing silently. It felt too bright. He kept going. A man walked his dog across the street. The leash glowed faintly in the dark. James slowed for a moment, maybe to nod, maybe to say something like evening, but the man looked past him, toward nothing in particular, and moved on without a word. The silence wasn't just around him. It was in him. By the time he reached the edge of the neighborhood, the lights were dimmer. Houses looked the same. White fences, fake grass and some lawns, porch lights left on for no one. He stood in front of one house longer than he meant to, number 1124. The porch swing still hung slightly off-kilter. The oak tree still wore the tire swing she used to twist herself dizzy in. James didn't go up the steps. Not yet. He stood on the sidewalk and looked. The windows were dark except for a soft lamp somewhere deep inside. The kind people leave on to make a house feel lived in. He thought about what Ellie might look like now. If she still had the little gap between her front teeth. If she still hummed under her breath when she colored. He hadn't heard her voice in 18 months. Letters from the base got returned unopened. His phone calls went silent, and Laura never picked up. Not since the last time. He didn't blame her. Not really. He just didn't know how to come back different when the world out there had carved into him something the world back here couldn't read. He took the steps one at a time. Each creak beneath his boots sounded too loud. The porch still smelled like old paint and rain-soaked wood. He sat down instead of knocking. Just lowered the bag next to him and let the night settle. No one opened the door. No curtain shifted. He let his hands rest on his knees. One of them still bore a faint scar from a burn that never quite healed right. The air was colder than he remembered. Or maybe he just lost the sense of what warm used to mean. Somewhere far off, a train groaned against the horizon. The kind of sound that makes you feel smaller without knowing why. James tilted his head back, eyes half closed. He wasn't ready to knock. Not yet. Not when he didn't know who'd answer. Or if they call him Dad. He reached into the side pocket of his bag, pulled out the small stuffed fox, and placed it gently beside him on the step. It leaned against his leg, lopsided and silent, like it remembered more about the child he left behind than he did. The porch light flickered once and stayed on. James stared at it. He wondered if it was motion sensor or just faulty wiring. The kind of thing people meant to fix but never got around to. Like conversations. Or promises. He stood slowly, knees tight from the cold, and too many years crouched behind barriers, waiting for things to explode. The house in front of him didn't have landmines, but it had silence, and that could blow a man apart in its own way. The key was still where it used to be, tucked behind the loose board under the gutter spout. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the edge of the porch and looked across the yard. The grass had grown uneven. The sprinkler head near the mailbox was broken, spitting rust stains in a crooked arc. The American flag, once crisp and hung with care, now sagged on the pole, frayed at the corner. No one noticed. Or maybe they had, and just didn't care anymore. That thought settled into his chest like a weight. What happens when the people you left everything for stop noticing? He moved to the side gate. The latch still stuck a little. He remembered how Laura used to wiggle it loose with her elbow when her hand were full. James did the same. Muscle memory. Like loading a rifle. The backyard looked smaller. That happens when you come back older. The garden bed was dead, soil dry, and crumbling. The rosemary bush Ellie had once planted in a pink bucket was gone. In its place, a crack in the concrete path, wide enough to twist an ankle. James sat on the back step. No lights back here. Just the blue tint of early winter. He took out a lighter, not to smoke. He hadn't in years, but just to click it open and closed. The spark, the silence, the spark again. It was the only sound for a while. From here, he could see the back window that used to be her bedroom. The curtain was drawn, but he could just make out a small sticker at the bottom corner. A faded cartoon animal, maybe a unicorn or something. He remembered sticking it there himself, years ago, after Ellie had cried about monsters in the dark. Now, they'll know this is your room, he'd said, and they'll stay out. She had believed him. He hadn't come back to check if it worked. Time moved differently in places like this. You sit in the quiet, and hours feel like years. And in that time, you hear things you wish you hadn't. A neighbor's television hummed behind the fence, game show noise, canned laughter. A dog barked 3 houses down. A car started, idled, drove away. But this house didn't make a sound. James stood again. His legs ached. He walked back toward the porch, toward the door, toward the place he once called home out loud. He paused with his hand above the doorknob, then knocked once. A pause. No answer. He knocked again, softer this time, as if he didn't want to disturb something already fragile. Inside, a floorboard creaked. Then silence again. James stepped back, gave the door a long look, then sat down once more on the porch. He placed the stuffed fox on his lap. Its fur was matted. The left eye scratched from years of play. He smoothed it out gently with his thumb. If no one came, he'd still wait. Not because he was hopeful. He wasn't sure he had that in him anymore. But because it felt like the last place he could sit without being asked to leave. A light turned on upstairs. He didn't look up. He didn't smile. He just stayed there, still, holding something small in his lap. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel the need to run. The sky had shifted to that soft, gunmetal gray just before sunrise. James was still on the porch, feet flat on the wooden planks, his breath rising in steady puffs. The kind of cold that didn't bite but soaked in slow, like regret. When the door opened, it didn't creak. It just clicked once and drifted a few inches inward. No voice called out. No face appeared in the gap. James stood slowly, the stiff kind of rise that came from knees that had knelt too often in sand and gravel. He picked up the stuffed fox and held it awkwardly, like it was evidence, or apology. The hallway smelled different. Not like dirt and baby powder and dried lavender like before. Now it smelled clean, sharp, a manufactured lemon scent. Something you buy in bulk. Something meant to mask rather than reveal. He stepped in quietly, almost like a guest. The floors still had that soft give near the stairs with the subfloor warped after the flood. The picture frames on the wall were new. No trace of his face among them. He stood at the edge of the living room. The couch was different. Sleeker, modern. Reupholstered in a color he wouldn't have chosen. Cream, the kind of color that warned you not to spill anything. The coffee table was bare except for a single candle in a glass jar. It flickered. Scentless. Decorative. James looked for the small things that made a house feel like a home with a child in it. No toys underfoot. No art taped to the refrigerator. No forgotten socks curled in corners or sippy cups left half full on end tables. Just stillness. Clean, curated, impersonal stillness. He let the bag slide off his shoulder onto the floor. Laura appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her hair was tied back. Her sweater hung off one shoulder, like she'd dressed in a hurry but didn't want to show it. Her expression didn't hold anger or warmth, just tiredness. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. Then, before he could answer, she added, "Ellie's asleep. She played hard yesterday." James nodded once, not because it answered anything, but because he had nothing better to say. The silence between them wasn't sharp. It was dull, familiar. He scanned the room again. No little shoes by the door. No backpack half-zipped and slouched against the wall. It was like walking into a hotel that looked vaguely like a place he once lived. Everything shaped similarly, but emptied of any belonging. James took a step toward the stairs, then paused. "How is she?" he asked, voice low. Laura didn't look at him. "She's fine." The lie wasn't in the words. It was in the way her shoulders stiffened when she said them. He didn't press, didn't accuse. Didn't ask for a tour of the life that had gone on without him. He just stood at the bottom of the staircase for a long minute, listening, not for a cry, not for a laugh, just for a sound, a weight shifting on the floor above, a breath. But the house held its breath back, and James stood there, a soldier in a room with no battle, trying to figure out which side of the silence he belonged to. The stairs creaked less than he remembered. James moved slowly, as if each step might give away something he didn't mean to confess. The house was dark except for the thin yellow glow bleeding under a bedroom door at the end of the hall. Ellie's room used to be the second on the right. It still was, but the door was shut. His hand hovered over the doorknob, not to open it, just to feel the grain of the wood. He didn't know if she still slept with a night light. Didn't know if she kicked her blanket off like she used to. Didn't know what dreams she had now, or if they were the kind that woke her up crying. He lowered his hand, back downstairs. The kitchen was spotless. A bowl of apples sat in the center of the counter, polished. The old plastic owl cup Ellie had insisted on using for years was nowhere to be found. James opened the fridge. No more chocolate milk in the half-gallon jugs. No more string cheese or little yogurt cups with cartoon faces. Everything inside looked adult, labeled, measured, expiration dates all facing forward. Like someone had curated this refrigerator for inspection, not living. He turned toward the dining table. That, too, had changed. No paint stains in the wood from finger painting. No dent from toy trucks. No scuffed chair legs where a child had kicked while swinging her feet. It was just a table, set with 2 placemats, and one high-back chair pulled out, maybe left that way on purpose, or maybe just forgotten. James leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. The stuffed fox was still in his hand. It looked wrong here, too soft, too real in a house that had forgotten how to feel lived in. He placed it gently on the bottom stair. No ceremony, just a quiet offering. A moment later, a floorboard shifted overhead. Not loud, not frantic, just the weight of a child turning in sleep, or maybe waking up. He looked up, waited. Nothing followed. No small feet padding toward the hallway. No voice calling Dad. Just the hush of a home arranged around the absence of small things. James stayed still, long enough to count how many breaths fit into a single silence. Then he sat back on the couch that wasn't his, in a room that wasn't hers anymore, and waited. For morning, for light, for anything that felt like a beginning. It happened at 4:12 a.m. Not a moan, not a cry, a scream. Sharp, split, small but deep, like it came from the bottom of something that had been filling for a long time. James had been half awake on the couch, his neck stiff, one boot still on, the other resting by the leg of the coffee table. He sat upright before he knew he had moved. The scream hadn't lasted more than 2 seconds, but it had weight, real weight, like it had gathered force from too many silences before it. He didn't call out, didn't ask who it was. He already knew. His feet hit the floor. The house, which had seemed so polished and still hours ago, suddenly felt like a maze, like the corners had curled inward, like every wall was listening. James took the stairs 2 at a time, not loud, but not quiet either. He didn't care now who heard him. At the end of the hallway, Ellie's door was shut. The glow underneath was gone. He tried the knob. It didn't turn. Locked. His chest tightened, not like panic, but like something in his body remembered how to move without orders. One step back. Weight shifted. Then his foot came forward and struck just above the handle. The door flew open. The light from the hallway spilled in like fog. The room was dim, still painted the soft lavender she had picked at age 5. But it felt hollow now. No posters on the walls. No stickers on the dresser. Just bare corners and too much space. In the far side of the room, curled into herself like a comma, was Ellie, her knees drawn to her chest, her small body trembling. One hand over her face, the other clenched in her nightgown. There was a faint red mark on her cheek, still fresh, like a blossom blooming in pain. James froze. Not because he didn't know what to do. He did. But because in that moment, the quiet between them felt too sacred to break. Someone else was in the room. Laura, not startled, not frantic, just standing, 2 steps from the bed, holding a pillow. For a moment, no one moved. The air thinned. Even the house seemed to lean in, waiting. Then James stepped forward slow, knees bending as he lowered himself beside his daughter. He reached out. Ellie flinched. Not much, just a flicker through her shoulders. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She just sat there, tears drying on her cheek, eyes open, unfocused, like looking through someone instead of at them. I was just about to handle it, Laura said behind him. Her voice tried to be steady, but it wobbled around the edges. She slipped, got scared. That's all. James didn't answer, didn't turn around. His fingers brushed the back of Ellie's neck. He felt a small knot beneath the skin, an old bruise maybe, or tension that never left. Her hands were cold, ice cold. He peeled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Not a gesture of warmth, a shield. You said she was asleep, he murmured. Not a question, not an accusation, just a line drawn in the sand. Laura didn't respond, at least not with words. James picked Ellie up. She didn't resist, but her arms hung limp, her cheek pressed into his collarbone. Not with trust, but surrender. A tear soaked through the fabric. He didn't wipe it away. Like something had drained from her, something children should never have to lose. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stayed close, barely breathing. The candle was still burning. The couch still perfect. The room still clean. Too clean. He laid Ellie down on the couch slowly, carefully, the way you place something fragile without knowing what's already cracked inside. He took the throw blanket from the armrest, cream-colored, almost too soft, and covered her gently. Her eyes stayed open, wide, unfocused, like she hadn't landed back inside herself yet. Then he turned. Laura had followed, but stopped just outside the doorway. Behind her, two more figures stood at the top of the stairs. Ricky, Mrs. Susan. Ricky's hoodie was half-zipped, hair messy. He blinked in the low light, like someone who didn't like being caught off guard. What happened, he asked. All I heard was a scream. James didn't answer. Mrs. Susan stayed quiet, a coffee mug clutched in both hands. She looked at James like she already had her version of the story ready to tell. He looked past both of them, then back to Ellie. In the kitchen, James opened the fridge. He wasn't hungry. He was looking. No chocolate milk, no yogurt pouches, no almond butter or bananas, or even sliced deli meat she used to eat rolled up with toothpicks. And nowhere was the owl-shaped plastic cup that had followed her from age 3 through age 6. The fridge was organized. Adult food, prepped greens, almond milk in glass bottles. Minimalist, cold, sterile, a kitchen for display, not for a child. Back in the living room, Ellie hadn't moved. Her fingers curled just slightly at the edge of the blanket, but her body stayed still. James sat beside her, not too close, just enough to let her feel his weight in the room. He leaned down and whispered, "Talk to me, kiddo. Anything." Ellie's lips pressed together. Then, slowly, her head shifted side to side. No, not yet. James closed his eyes, inhaled. When he opened them, he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at what had been allowed to grow in his absence. He looked up toward the stairs. "From now on," he said, voice low but firm, "no one goes into her room but me. Understood?" No one answered. But that wasn't the kind of statement that needed agreement. It just needed to be heard. "Are you leaving again?" Ellie's voice was a whisper, so faint it barely reached him. But it did, and it split something. James didn't speak right away. He looked at her face, the place on her cheek where the red had started to fade into a dull mark. He reached out, gently brushed a hair from her forehead. Then, "No," he said, "not soft, not loud, just real. I'm staying." There was no applause. No one cheered. The candle burned lower on the side table. James sat beside her as the hours stretched, and his daughter finally closed her eyes. Not because she felt safe, but because she wanted to believe it might be possible. James didn't sleep. Not really. He kept his hand on Ellie's shoulder, light as breath, just enough so she'd know he hadn't left. Her body twitched in sleep, small shifts like echoes of fear still moving through her. Every now and then she whimpered, barely audible, but never woke. Outside, dawn teased the edges of the curtains. Inside, the house remained wrapped in an unnatural calm. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just quiet. But James had learned a long time ago that quiet didn't mean peace. When the sky began to lighten, he lifted Ellie gently. She stirred but didn't open her eyes, curling into his chest like it was something she used to do but had forgotten how. He carried her upstairs, her body feather-light and heavy all at once. In her room, nothing had changed from the night before. Still lavender, still bare, still not quite a child's space. He turned on the bedside lamp to its lowest setting, tucked her in carefully, but wrong in shape. Her left wrist, another, greenish, with a yellowing edge like time had tried to erase it. At the base of her neck, near her hairline, something else. A small, round mark, like a fingernail press. Faded but there. James stopped breathing for a second, then exhaled slow. He stood, stepped away from the bed like someone backing out of a room full of glass. Downstairs, the kitchen had already come alive. Laura was dressed, sweater tucked in, apron tied, lipstick subtle but present. She moved with efficiency. Toast, butter, coffee, everything in its place. Ricky sat at the table, hoodie back on, spooning cereal into his mouth with both feet propped up on another chair. Mrs. Susan stood at the counter, pouring coffee like it was any other day. His eyes moved across the kitchen. No all cup, no kids' cereal, no sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Dad, don't forget the crayons." It was like she existed here only in theory, not in the texture of things. "What's that bruise on her cheek?" James asked the question without raising his voice. It landed softly, but clearly. Laura paused, just for a second. Said nothing. Laura's hands kept moving. "That's an old one. Maybe school. Maybe when the housekeeper was still around. Before she quit." James didn't respond, because something in the silence told him this wasn't the first time, and it hadn't started yesterday. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just stood there long enough for the lie to sour in the air. Then he turned and walked away. Not because he was done, but because sometimes the first battle you win is the one where you say nothing and see who flinches first. That morning, James drove Ellie to preschool like he used to. The truck was older now. So was he. Everything felt a little worn, but still holding together, barely. Ellie sat in the passenger seat, hands in her lap, seatbelt buckled tight. The stuffed fox nestled against her ribs like a shield. She didn't speak. She didn't hum like she once did. She just stared out the window as the telephone poles slipped past. Her reflection faint in the glass. Flickering. Almost not there. The preschool sat at the end of a quiet street. Red brick, chain-link fence around the yard. Still smelled like wet mulch and old crayons. Bethany stood in the doorway with the attendance clipboard. She looked up and saw James. Her expression faltered. Not surprise, not joy. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Regret. James walked Ellie to the door. She clutched the fox tighter. Bethany crouched, her voice gentle. "Good morning, Ellie." Ellie didn't answer. Just gave a tiny nod. Her eyes didn't meet anyone's. James leaned down. "You go on in, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'll talk to Miss Bethany for just a second. Then I'll come get you." She nodded again, then stepped inside. No oubliette, no glance back, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to hope. James stood beside Bethany, his posture straight, but not threatening. Not anymore. He was done scaring people, but he was still watching. "While I was gone," he began, voice even, "did you notice anything different about Ellie?" Bethany hesitated. She shifted her weight. "She's quieter, draws a lot, doesn't smile like she used to. And when the other kids tease her or bump into her, she doesn't react much. Doesn't cry, doesn't say stop, just kind of disappears into herself." James's jaw tightened. "What does she draw?" "She never lets anyone see." He paused, lowered his voice. "Have you ever seen bruises?" Bethany looked through the glass of the door. Her eyes softened, then hardened. "Yes," she said finally. "A scrape on her wrist once. A red mark near her neck." I asked. "I don't have the authority to interfere in family matters." James pulled out his wallet, wrote a number on the back of a business card. "If anything else comes up, anything at all, call me." He handed her the card. Firm, gentle, then turned and walked back down the steps. His boots made almost no sound on the concrete. That afternoon, he bought 2 ice cream cones from a food truck park near the park. It was too cold for ice cream. Didn't matter. They sat on a bench, Ellie beside him. She held the cone. Didn't eat it. James watched her. "Tired, honey?" She didn't answer. Then, after a moment, "No." He waited, then asked, "Did your stepmother hurt you?" Ellie didn't move, then shook her head. Then, a moment later, nodded. James didn't press, didn't ask for details. He just sat with her in the cold. After a while, Ellie whispered, "My stepmom doesn't like me, but Grandma said if I told you, you'd leave and never come back." James turned fully toward her. "Who told you that?" "Grandma. And my stepmom." Ellie finally looked up, met his eyes. "I'm scared that if I tell the truth, you'll disappear." He let out a slow breath, set his ice cream down, pulled her close, not tight, just enough for her to feel it. Then he whispered, "No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. Even if you're mad, even if you don't want to talk, I'll still be here." Ellie gave a small nod, tiny, hesitant, like hope. Remembered. The next morning, James asked for a favor without using the word. He sent an email to the base, short, direct, no emotion in the lines. Requested a 7-day personal leave. No details, just enough to buy time. He said something about headaches. Said he needed rest. Laura didn't question it. She just gave a nod, like someone grateful for a pause in the noise. James went upstairs. Closed the bedroom door partway. Not all the way, just enough to let sound in. Then he lay on the bed, flat, arms crossed. Not sleeping, not even close. He listened. The house had a rhythm. Spoons against ceramic. The quiet clink of glasses being rinsed. The low thump of a suitcase wheel dragging across wood. It wasn't suspicious if you weren't listening closely. But James had spent years listening to things that weren't meant to be heard. Around 11:30, he heard Ellie's slippers shuffle down the hall. Soft, light, the way children move when they're told to stay small. He heard Diane's voice in the kitchen, not shouting, just loud enough to bruise. Dirtying up the floor again? You trying to push me? A pause. No reply. You're lucky you get to eat. To live in this house. Your mother dying, best thing that ever happened. James opened his eyes, but he didn't move. Not yet. He sat up quietly. Crossed the room in bare feet. Cracked the door open just enough to hear better. Just enough to breathe. Ellie's voice, almost too soft for human ears. I'm sorry. I already cleaned it. Diane again. Sharper. Shut up. Clean what? You call this clean when there's still a puddle. Then the sound of cabinet door. A towel being pulled out. Ellie's feet. Like he was back in a mission zone, clearing a space he'd already mapped in his mind. He walked down the hall, one hand on the banister, gripping so hard his knuckles went pale. At the base of the stairs, he stopped, then called out, "Come," even like a soldier at roll call. Dad's home. The house froze. The silence was instant. Ricky's footsteps scrambled. He came to the hallway fast, words spilling. "Oh, hey, you're up. I was just watching her for Diane. She spilled some water. I told her to clean it up. It was a joke, you know? Just teasing. She's sensitive, that's all." James didn't respond. He moved past him, straight into the kitchen. Diane stood near the counter. Her hands were dry. Too dry. No without. No evidence of cleaning. He found Ellie crouched by the sink, knees on the floor, a dirty rag in her hands. Thin suds streaking the tile. Soapy water smeared in uneven patches. She didn't look up. Didn't flinch. She just scrubbed, slowly, like she'd been doing it for hours. Like she didn't know how to stop. Her pajamas were damp at the hem. Her hair messy. Her eyes lowered. James knelt down beside her. Too late. What's going on here? I didn't know Ricky was in here. I was in the kitchen. He must have seen the spill and tried to help. You know how Ricky runs his mouth. The girl's just sensitive. That's all. James said nothing. Just kept holding the rag. Ellie didn't move. Didn't even look at him. She'd stopped reacting. And that terrified him more than anything. James didn't speak right away. He stood slowly, the rag still in his hand. It dripped onto the floor in dull, uneven splatters. Ellie remained crouched. Her knees left 2 faint prints on the tile. The kind that would vanish in seconds, unless someone cared enough to trace them. She's always been dramatic. You know that. He looked at her. Not hard. Not with anger. Just long enough for the silence between them to stretch, taut and visible. Then he turned to Ellie. Kneeling again. Lower this time. Leveled to her world. He didn't reach for her. Didn't pull her close. He just asked, voice low, "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded. But it was the kind of nod that children give when they've been trained to lie for safety. Not agreement. Just survival. James clenched his hand. The rag balled in his palm. He stood. "Get out," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Diane blinked. "Excuse me. You heard me. You and Ricky. Get out." A beat. Ricky raised an eyebrow, half amused. "Dude, relax. It's not that deep." James didn't flinch. "I'm not asking," he said. Diane hesitated. And in that moment, James saw it. Not fear. Not guilt. But calculation. She tilted her head, letting out a small, breathy scoff. "You always overreacted. That's your thing, isn't it? I'm not saying she doesn't feel things. But she imagines a lot. That's what the therapist said. Remember?" James stared at her. A long stare. And he knew, if he looked long enough, the truth would start to fold. Gaslight itself into something blurry. He broke eye contact first. Not out of weakness, but out of preservation. Ricky snorted. "She's soft, man. You don't get it. These kids nowadays." James stepped toward him. Just once. No threat. No movement beyond that. Ricky's face twitched. Then, with a shrug and a mutter, he left. Diane followed, but not before saying, "We'll talk about this when you calm down." The door closed behind them with a click that felt like punctuation, but not closure. James stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands at his sides, breathing quiet. Ellie was still sitting on the floor. He didn't rush to lift her, didn't try to fix it all in one sweep. Instead, he sat down, not beside her, but just enough away that she wouldn't feel cornered. A safe distance, a silent offering. The room was still, but it wasn't empty. His eyes scanned the space, the spotless counters, the polished surfaces, the candle in the middle of the table. Almost invisible, he reached for it, opened it carefully, crayon on folded paper. 3 figures, one tall, one small, one shadowy, faceless in the middle. At the bottom, scribbled in uneven letters, "Don't tell." James slipped the paper into his shirt pocket. When he turned back, Ellie hadn't moved, but her knees had relaxed just slightly. Her breathing no longer caught in her throat. He sat with her in the quiet, not filling it, not explaining it, just staying. And somewhere in that stillness, she leaned, not into him, but closer, by an inch, maybe less. But he felt it, and it was enough. James didn't tell her to go upstairs. He didn't tell her to do anything. Instead, he stayed on the kitchen floor until Ellie stood up on her own, still barefoot, pajamas damp at the cuffs. Her eyes didn't meet his, but her body turned slightly toward him. That was enough for now. His knees popped. He didn't groan. He took his time cleaning the floor. Not because it needed it, but because she shouldn't have been the one to do it. Not like that. Not ever. The rag was already sour from hours of use. He didn't mind. His hands were used to worse. When he finished, he opened the kitchen window and let in the cold. Fresh air had a way of pushing out what silence left behind. Later, the house settled into something quieter. No Ricky, no Diane, no footsteps that didn't belong. Just him and Ellie. He changed it. It was a small thing, but it mattered. That afternoon, he opened the old closet near the laundry room. The back panel was loose. He remembered that from before. Behind it, a box of Ellie's old toys still sat, shoved back where no one bothered to look. He carried the box upstairs. Her bedroom door was ajar, not wide open, just enough to hear breathing if you stood close enough. He didn't go in. He left the box by the doorway, then knocked, twice. "Gentle. Some of your stuff," he said through the crack. No rush. No answer. He didn't expect one. Back in the living room, he sat in the chair that used to be his. It was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he had simply learned to carry more. The paper from Ellie's drawing was still in his pocket. He took it out again, unfolding the creases, smoothing the corners like that might soften what it meant. 3 figures. Still that blank one in the center. The one with no face. The one Ellie had drawn darker than the others. James stared at it, not with anger, just ache. He stayed like that for a while. Long enough for the light outside to shift. Long enough for the shadow from the banister to fall across the carpet at a different angle. Then, soft footsteps on the stairs. He didn't move. Didn't look. Just listened. A pause. Then the sound of something being placed on the floor. The lightest tap. A sheet of drawing paper. When he finally looked over, it was resting by the leg of the coffee table. Crayon again. This time, the house had a tree out front. And only 2 people. One tall, one small, holding hands. The space in between them colored yellow. Light. James didn't smile. Not fully, but something loosened in his chest. Not hope. Not yet. Just a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't call her downstairs. Didn't say thank you. Didn't ask who the second person was. He didn't need to. That night, he left the hall light on, just in case. The night was quiet. Too quiet for James to sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, arms at his sides like he was still in uniform. The mattress was too soft, or maybe just too empty. He hadn't slept in that bed in over 2 years. Diane used to joke that it was his side, until the war made it no longer his home. Now it smelled of lavender and furniture polish and a life he hadn't lived. He turned his head slightly. Ellie's was cracked open. The hallway light, still on, cast a narrow gold line across the floorboards. He didn't close his eyes. Not yet. At some point during the night, he heard soft shuffling. Not the hurried footsteps of a child afraid of the dark. Just hesitant ones, like someone testing how much the floor remembered them. Then a pause. Then the quiet sound of water running in the kitchen sink. He stayed still, listened to the cupboard open, then close. A glass set down gently. A chair scraped. Not fully out, just nudged. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of someone trying. By morning, James didn't ask questions. He came down the stairs slow, like a man who didn't want to scare off a deer at the edge of the woods. On the counter, there was an empty glass. Clean. A plate with crumbs. The chair she'd nudged was almost perfectly aligned. But not quite. He let it stay that way. He didn't adjust it. Didn't tidy the scene. Let her know, if she looked, that someone had noticed, and left it alone. He sat on the porch with coffee he didn't really want. The air was cool. The kind of spring morning where the trees hadn't bloomed yet, but were beginning to soften around the edges. Ellie came out barefoot, again. She didn't say a word, just walked past him and sat 2 steps down from where he was. Still holding that fox. Still not looking at him. But she sat. She stayed. Bird feeder's empty, James said, not expecting a reply. Ellie nodded. He didn't ask her to help. Didn't ask her anything. Just stood, went inside, came back with seed. Filled it without ceremony. Sat again. Watched a single sparrow land, tilt its head like it was unsure, then dig in. Ellie leaned forward a little. The sun caught the gold in her hair. She didn't smile, but she didn't retreat either. That afternoon, she left something on the kitchen table. It wasn't a picture. It was a list. Crayon again, blue this time. No title, just peanut butter, jelly, milk, string cheese, grapes, cookies, the circle ones. At the bottom, juice with a fox on it. James read it once, then again. Folded it carefully like it was a map to something sacred. He didn't say a word. Just pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like Texas. The next day, she followed him to the store. Didn't speak. Didn't ask for anything. Just walked slightly behind him. Quiet. Alert. He didn't push the cart too fast. Didn't tell her not to trail behind. Let her take her time down each aisle. At checkout, she put the juice on the conveyor herself. When they got home, she opened the bottle and poured 2 glasses. One for her. One for him. Set it on the table across from her seat. No words. Just presence. And that night, without being asked, she turned off the hall light herself. Then left her door open. Just a little. Enough for someone to knock if they needed to. Enough for someone to listen. James didn't move for a long time. Didn't even blink. Sometimes, the smallest crack is enough to let everything begin again. It started with the door hinge. The shed hadn't been opened in over 2 years. Maybe more. The padlock was rusted, but not enough to stop a determined hand. James jiggled it loose, half expecting spiders to fall or a raccoon to shoot out and remind him this wasn't his territory anymore. But the shed stayed silent. The door creaked open like a breath held too long. And he stepped in. Dust hung in the light like memory. Everything was where he left it. The fishing rods, his father's old toolbox, a half-finished birdhouse they never got around to painting. One corner of the workbench still had Diane's handwriting. Don't forget the tomatoes scrawled on a yellow sticky note, faded to pale beige. He didn't touch it. Just stood there, eyes adjusting, breathing in the scent of old cedar and oil and time. It smelled like before. He didn't plan to clean it, but his hands moved anyway. Moved in that way hands do when they've been trained to survive, one task at a time. No questions. No expectations. He took the tools down, wiped each handle, tossed the rotted gloves, swept the dust from the floor in long, steady strokes. Each motion quiet, measured, like sweeping away the months no one spoke of. Ellie came to the doorway around noon. Didn't step in. Didn't say anything. Just stood, arms wrapped around that same fox, watching. James caught her in the corner of his eye, but didn't turn. He didn't want to scare her off. He knew that look, like someone afraid to ask if they were allowed to belong. He kept sweeping. She watched a minute more, then patted away. But that afternoon, there was a sandwich on a plate waiting in the kitchen. No note, just sitting there. Peanut butter and jelly. Crust cut off, like her way of saying, I saw. I don't know how to help. But I brought this. The next morning, he returned to the shed, reorganized the screws, sharpened the clippers, oiled the hinges of the door he'd ignored for years. And when a hammer slipped from his hand and banged hard against the wood, he cursed under his breath, reflex, but didn't shout, didn't rage. He just sat on the stool, head in hands for a while. Let himself feel the ache in his shoulder, the tightness in his jaw, the small echo of pain that had nothing to do with tools. Later that evening, Ellie appeared again. This time, she crossed the threshold, set down a small ceramic cup, one of Diane's teacups. It held a few wildflowers, mostly dandelions and weeds, but placed carefully, with intention. She didn't say a word, just looked at the shelf, pointed to an empty space. James made room. Gently, with both hands, he placed the cup there like it was glass. Because maybe it was They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. The next day, she brought a cracked picture frame. Inside it, an old photo. Him, in uniform. Her on his shoulders. Sunlight behind them, both squinting and laughing. He hadn't seen that photo in years. He took it with a stillness that said more than thank you. Set it beside the flowers. And let it stay. That night, he didn't lock the shed. Didn't shut the door all the way. Let the night breeze carry through, like an old friend coming home without knocking. There was something about the way the air moved that evening. It wasn't anything most people would notice. But James did. The trees weren't as restless. The gravel underfoot didn't crunch as loud. The porch light, always a bit wobbly, always flickering, held steady for once. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He wasn't sure when this became part of the routine again. Maybe it never really left. Maybe he just stopped noticing when he came home. If you could call it that, coming home. Ellie was inside, somewhere between brushing her teeth and forgetting to turn off the hallway light. He could hear the low hum of the kitchen fan, the soft creak of a floorboard above, little sounds that meant a house was breathing. He didn't go in. Not yet. Just leaned against the frame. Let the evening settle into his bones. There was something comforting about that, letting the world keep spinning, but slower. A screen door opened quietly. Her footsteps were soft, barely there, like she was afraid to interrupt whatever it was he was thinking. She didn't ask to sit next to him. Just did. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the silence did, and that somehow was louder than words. She had that fox again, tucked in her arms, worn smooth at the seams. He didn't know how to say, "You don't have to carry that anymore." But he didn't say anything at all. Instead, he pointed out toward the tree line. "See that one? The tallest one near the shed? That's a sycamore." It wasn't much, but it was the first sentence he'd said to her that week. She nodded, didn't look up, just whispered, "Okay." And that was enough. They sat there for a long time. He sipped his coffee. She picked at the loose threads of her sweater. They both watched the sky go from deep blue to something almost navy, like the world was exhaling. At some point, without thinking, he took the flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on. Walked down the steps, shined it toward the side of the house. Saw the old wind chimes tangled in a branch, rusted, forgotten. He didn't say why, but he took them down. Carried them back like they mattered, like they were part of something that needed remembering. Ellie followed, without a word. Together, they untangled the threads. She held the top while he tied the new string. It didn't swing much, but it rang just once, soft and clear. Like a yes. They went back to the porch. And for the first time, he noticed. She left the fox behind, sat with both hands on her lap, not needing to hold anything, not needing to hide. The porch light didn't flicker that night, and he didn't go inside first. He waited for her to stand, and when she did, he followed. Not because he had to, but because maybe he finally could. The attic had always smelled like old pine and dust and forgotten years. James stood at the bottom of the ladder, one hand on the rung, the other on his knee, steadying himself. His back still ached in the mornings. His shoulders still flinched sometimes, leftover pain from a world that never made it back with him. But today, for the first time since he returned, he climbed. One step at a time. No rules, no music, just the creak of wood and the soft, hesitant echo of Ellie's footsteps behind him. She didn't ask why they were going up there. She didn't need to. The light up top was yellow and weak. The kind of bulb you never bother replacing because no one ever came up here long enough to mind. Boxes lined the walls. Some labeled. Some just cardboard softened with time and mildew. There were old curtains. A broken lamp with a red scarf still wrapped around it. A plastic crate full of tangled Christmas lights from the year Ellie was born. James didn't move at first. Just took it all in. He didn't remember packing these things. But he must have. He didn't remember what they meant to him. But something inside him did. There was one box, smaller than the rest, tucked beneath a folded American flag, beneath a yellowed newspaper that read "Local Hero Returns." The box wasn't labeled. He crouched slow, stiff, and brushed off the dust. His name was written on it, not in marker, but in a child's handwriting. "Dad stuff, don't touch." He smiled without realizing it. Not a big smile, just enough to feel it in the corner of his mouth. He opened the lid. Inside, a watch with a cracked face, a dog tag chain that hadn't been worn in years, a faded letter he never mailed. In a drawing, stick figures, a house with a crooked roof, a son smiling in the corner, and three names: me, Mom, Dad. James sat down, right there on the attic floor. Ellie sat beside him, still not asking, still not saying much. She didn't need to. She just took the letter, unfolded it slowly. Looked at it the way kids do when they're trying not to ask for something. I wrote that. He said finally, voice dry but soft. In Kuwait. Never got the courage to send it. She nodded. Can I keep it? She asked. He looked over. Met her eyes. Noticed for the first time how much of Sarah lived there. And how much didn't. He nodded. And that was that. They stayed up there for almost an hour. Not sorting. Not throwing anything away. Just remembering. In the quiet way you do when time isn't pressing you anymore. He didn't try to explain the war. She didn't ask about the nightmares. They just sat. Sometimes silent. Sometimes humming along to the wind that crept through the roof cracks. Later, as they came down the ladder, James paused on the last step. The floor below didn't feel as far away anymore. And the box Ellie held in her arms wasn't just a box. It was the weight of remembering carried together. Not as alone anymore. Not hers to wonder about. But theirs, held between them like a bridge. Small and unspoken. That night, before bed, Ellie left the letter on his nightstand. Folded neatly. No note. No postscript. Just a quiet gesture. And when he turned off the lamp. For the first time in years, James Graves slept through the night. Not because everything was fixed, but because someone else had opened the attic with him and stayed. There were things James never meant to pass on. The stiffness in his shoulders. The way he flinched at sudden noises. The quiet habit of scanning every room twice before sitting down. They weren't gifts. They weren't lessons. They were residue. He saw them now, not in himself, but in the small ways Ellie moved. The way she locked her bedroom door. The way she folded her clothes too neatly. The way she looked at him sometimes, like she was trying not to ask him something. That quiet made him ache more than any scar. They had started eating dinner together. Not every night, but often enough to notice the change. No music, no TV, just clinking forks and the soft sounds of a house learning how to breathe again. One night, James noticed her cutting her food into perfect squares, like she needed to control something, like chaos wasn't welcome at the table. He remembered doing the same thing, years ago, in a mess tent surrounded by dust and silence. Back then, he thought it made the world feel manageable. Now, he knew it was just a way of hiding. Ellie never asked about the war. Not directly, but she watched. She watched how he kept the curtains drawn tight at night, how he always sat facing the door, how he tensed at the low rumble of helicopters on summer evenings, even when they were far off. And sometimes, just sometimes, she mirrored him, not because she had been through it, but because she had lived with someone who had. One Saturday, James found her sketch pad on the porch. He hadn't meant to look, but it was open, the wind flipping pages. There were drawings, not of people, but of empty rooms. A hallway with light barely touching the floor. A chair in the middle of a kitchen. A door half closed. Each one felt like something left unsaid. Each one looked like him. He closed the pad gently. Didn't mention it. That night, he left his own sketch. A simple line drawing of the two of them, sitting on the porch, legs dangling off the steps. He left it on her nightstand. She didn't say anything the next morning, but the sugar bowl had been moved closer to his coffee cup, just enough to notice. James didn't want Ellie to become him. Didn't want her to carry his silences, his ghosts, his weathered caution. But you don't get to choose which parts of you your children carry. You only get to decide what you do with the time left. He started writing letters. Not the kind you send. Just small pieces of thought. Memories in shorthand. Feelings in code. He wrote them on index cards. Left them in drawers, tucked between books. Taped inside the glove compartment of the truck she might one day drive. Things like, there are days the world feels too loud. It's okay to turn down the volume. You don't have to be okay for me. One she could cross when she was ready. Some nights, Ellie would sit beside him and not speak. Just lean her shoulder slightly into his. And that, he thought, was the kindest form of forgiveness he had ever known. Not a word, not a grand gesture, just the willingness to stay close. Even when neither of them had the right words. Even when the wounds were old and deep. That's how healing came for them. Not in speeches, but in small rituals. 2 mugs on the counter. A light left on in the hallway. A note in the toolbox drawer. You're not broken. Just tired. They were not the family in the picture frames at Walmart. But they were something better. They were still here. Still trying. Still showing up. And sometimes, that's the only legacy that matters. James never kept photographs from the war. No medals on display. No stories over dinner. Not because he wanted to forget, but because remembering was too loud. He figured silence would be safer for Ellie. But children hear what you never say. They learn it in how you leave the room when the news comes on. and how you stiffen when someone slams a door, and how you flinch at fireworks in July. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those golden ones in late spring, when the light feels like something you could drink. Ellie came home from school quieter than usual. She sat on the porch with a shoebox on her lap, looking like it might swallow her whole. James didn't ask. She opened the lid, slow. Inside were small objects, a charm bracelet, a photo booth strip of her and a friend, a folded note she didn't unfold. At the bottom, a plastic soldier missing one arm. "I found this in Grandma's garage," she said finally. James nodded. "That's Dean," he said, surprising himself. She looked at him. "You named them. All of them." "Dean, Marcus, Joe." He didn't finish the list. It had been over 15 years since he'd last said their names out loud. They sat there for a while, just breathing. "I thought maybe—" "You didn't want to talk about it," she said. "I didn't," James replied. Pause. But sometimes not talking doesn't work either. That night, he took a box out from under the bed. Inside were things he'd meant to throw away, but never could. A worn field journal. A cigarette case he never used. A pair of broken aviators. A patch with the name Graves still stitched crooked. He laid them out on the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Ellie watched him from the doorway. Didn't interrupt. Didn't ask. Just watched. That's how she always loved him best. Without pressure. Without expectation. Like silence was enough. Like presence was permission. James told her about the boy who used to sing in the back of the Humvee. About the sergeant who never learned how to swim, but carried them all across a flood once. About the time they built a Christmas tree out of scrap metal in the middle of a desert. He left out the worst parts. But Ellie didn't need blood to know a wound. She just nodded. And when he paused, she refilled his glass of water like it was a way of saying, "I'm still here." After that night, James began keeping a small wooden box in the living room. He called it the stories box. It wasn't locked, wasn't labeled. But every week, he'd write one story on a card, fold it, add it to the pile. Not just worse stories. Stories about her birth. About how terrified he'd been to hold her. About the first time she laughed, and he cried without meaning to. One day, she asked if she could add to it. He said yes. Her first card said, "Dad cried during up. I pretended not to notice." He laughed for a long time that night. The kind of laugh that doesn't erase grief, but makes it sit down and hush for a while. On a Sunday morning, Ellie brought home a stray dog. It was muddy, half-starved, with a scar across its face. James looked at it like he was looking in a mirror. They named it Walt. Walt was afraid of thunder. Wouldn't climb stairs, and took weeks to learn how to sleep indoors. But eventually he did. And sometimes, grumbling about loose wires. Ellie stood beside him, holding the flashlight steady. "You know," she said, "you're not the same anymore." He froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. Right next to the photo, he swore he didn't carry. Some truths are quiet, but they echo forever. There was a drawer in the hallway James never opened. Not because he forgot what was inside, but because he remembered exactly. The house was quiet that morning. Ellie had gone to school early for a music rehearsal, and the dog was still snoring near the back porch. Hand hovering over the worn brass handle like it might bite him. It didn't. It never did. He pulled it open. Inside, a stack of envelopes never sent, all addressed to his brother, David, who died in Kandahar. Old guitar picks, a photo of a woman he almost married once, and a tiny baby sock. Ellie's, yellowed from time. He sat down on the floor, the drawer still open. Some part of him had thought that if he never touched these things, they'd stay soft, untouched by air, by time, by regret. But everything changes, even in silence, especially in silence. He took out the sock, turned it over in his hand, thought of how small Ellie had been once, how afraid he was to hold her, how war taught him to disarm bombs, but not his own fear. A crumpled piece of paper fluttered from the stack. He picked it up, recognized his own handwriting, barely legible, rushed, written with the kind of urgency that comes at 3 a.m. when sleep won't come and ghosts won't leave. "Dear Ellie, if I don't come back, know that I watched every video they sent, every laugh, every step, even if I couldn't be there. I carried you in every breath. I hope you'll forgive me for not always knowing how to be your dad." James exhaled, not the heavy kind, the kind that clears a space inside the chest. Later that evening, Ellie came home with paint on her jeans and music sheets sticking out of her backpack. She saw him sitting in the hallway, drawer still open, the sock in his hand. She didn't ask, didn't say a word. She just walked over and sat beside him. Her shoulder touched his, not on purpose, but not by accident either. And there they stayed. There are moments between people, especially fathers and daughters, that don't need explaining. Like how he rested his head against the wall, and she leaned hers on his shoulder. How neither of them looked at the paper again, but they both knew it was there. How forgiveness doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it arrives as silence. Shared. Gentle. That night, James finally moved the drawer's contents into a wooden box he built years ago. He sanded it smooth, stained it by hand. On the lid, he carved one word, kept. Because that's what memories deserve. Of the two of them sitting on the porch, laughing. Walt, the dog, mid-yawn between them. She slipped it in without a word. And James realized something. He hadn't just come back home. He'd stayed. The next Saturday, Ellie found an old hammer in the shed and carried it into the house like she was holding a crown. Her face half hidden by the weight of it, knuckles dirt smudged. She set it down gently on the kitchen table and said nothing. James looked up from rinsing the coffee pot. "What's this?" he asked. She shrugged. "I want to put up something." That was it. No ceremony. No over-explaining. Just a child who had seen a blank wall and thought, maybe we can fill it. There was a small hallway between their bedrooms. Narrow. Always too dark. They cleared it out. James pulled down a dusty coat rack no one used anymore. Ellie swept. He patched a hole in the wall with a paper towel and a little hope. Then painted over it with the closest thing they had to beige. They didn't say it out loud, but they both knew what the hallway would become. Not a gallery. Not a shrine. Just a place. A place for the things that weren't loud enough to be centerpieces, but too precious to be forgotten. The first thing they hung was a photo of Ellie's first-grade class. Her bangs were crooked. Her smile half a second late. James stared at it long, while before tapping the nail in. Next, a drawing she made when she was 5. Her and James, stick figures with square hands and huge smiles. But she'd look prouder than if she'd won. A napkin with a coffee stain shaped like a heart. James didn't even remember where it came from. Maybe that's why it stayed. On a Tuesday, Ellie came home with a Polaroid. James was in it, wearing an apron, flour on his nose, looking like someone who wasn't haunted anymore. She taped it to the wall with a crooked piece of washi tape and smiled. "You look like Grandpa George," she said. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. Some nights, after Ellie had gone to bed, James would pass that hallway slowly, like it might move if he didn't look carefully. Each item on the wall carried a sound he could almost hear. A laugh, a breath, a step on the porch. It was still a quiet house. Still old, still full of air that remembered too much. But now it had a pulse. One evening, in that pause, that little hush of breath between two footsteps, that was everything. It was Ellie who started the ritual, though James didn't realize it first. One Sunday, while the frost still clung to the windows and the kettle hissed low on the stove, he came into the kitchen and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, 2 mugs beside her, waiting. She didn't say good morning. She didn't need to. She just patted the spot next to her. And James sat down. From that morning on, Sunday became theirs. No clocks, no plans, just 2 mugs, one with tea, one with coffee, and a small portable radio playing some old local station that only worked when the weather behaved. Sometimes they sat in silence. Other times, Ellie would hum along to a tune she half remembered, and James would tap the rhythm with his finger against the ceramic mug. They never called it anything, but over time, it became a place, not a room, not a day, but a place inside the week where nothing was demanded and no one had to explain why they needed it. One Sunday, Ellie asked if they could make pancakes. She said it with that cautious kind of joy, like someone testing the floor of an old bridge. James looked at the pantry. No meats, no C-dip, but he saw bananas and oats and a nearly empty jar of peanut butter. "Let's try," he said. The first batch burned. The second stuck to the pan. The third, somehow, was perfect, soft in the middle, golden at the edges. Ellie added a pinch of cinnamon without asking. James pretended not to notice the flour in her hair. They ate on the porch, wrapped in mismatched sweaters. No one spoke about the past, or the ache in the quiet, or the nights James still got up and stood in the hallway for no reason. They just ate, slowly, like they had all the time in the world. That afternoon, Ellie disappeared into her room for a while. James didn't follow. He didn't want to intrude. But later, when he passed by to put away laundry, he saw what she'd done. On her wall, above the small desk, she'd pinned a new drawing. It was the kitchen. 2 mugs, a radio, a girl, and a man on the floor. She'd written one word at the bottom, in crooked handwriting. Home. That night, James stood in the kitchen long after the dishes were washed. He looked at the radio. He looked at the empty mugs. And he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not relief. James stepped into the hallway and glanced at their wall again. The dog tag, the crayon tree, the tape holding everything slightly crooked. He reached up and added one more thing. A small note, folded once. Inside it read, Sunday, 6:42 a.m. She waited. Monday came, and with it the small noises of a life returning. James woke not to the sound of drills or radio static, but to a fork clinking gently against a plate. The kind of sound he used to overlook, now sharp enough to pull him from sleep like a call to arms. He lay there for a moment, eyes on the ceiling, not rushing toward the day. No nightmares that night. Just the sound of Ellie humming, off-key and free, somewhere down the hall. She made toast. Burn it, of course. But the effort was there, and James, in the awkward suit of fatherhood, told her it was good. Because it was. Not the taste, but the gesture. They sat by the window. She kicked her heels against the bench seat. He sipped coffee that had grown cold while he watched her draw sunflowers in the condensation. No one said it out loud, but the silence between them was getting lighter, like a coat they'd both been wearing, finally slipping off the shoulders a bit. By Thursday, she asked to walk to the store with him. James hadn't gone much of anywhere since coming home. Too many faces, too many lights, too many questions behind kind eyes. But with Ellie he could try, so they went, slowly, one hand in his, the other swinging loose with the rhythm of her chatter, the kind that had no point, no weight, just the noise of a child at peace. It was the longest walk James had taken in months. Halfway down Maple, his knee throbbed and the world tilted slightly, but he didn't say a word. Not because he had to be strong, but because he was afraid the moment would break if he admitted how much it meant to him. At the register, Ellie counted coins too slowly. The clerk smiled and said it was fine, take your time. Her hair had grown longer. She was taller than he remembered. He hadn't noticed when those things had changed, only that they had. Like time had passed through her while he stood still. And still she stayed. That night, after she went to sleep, James opened the back door and stepped outside. The sky was clear. Stars like pinpricks. He sat on the porch and lit a match, not for a cigarette, but just to watch the flame. He remembered doing the same in the desert. Same sky, different silence. And yet, this one felt warmer. He stayed there for a long while, until the cold reached through his sleeves and touched skin. Before going back in, he whispered something into the night. Not a prayer, not a name, just a promise. One only he needed to hear. In the weeks that followed, they settled into something that resembled rhythm. Ellie put her drawings on the fridge. James fixed the hinges on the back gate. Paper wrinkled, corners torn. She left it on the table without a word. James stared at it for a long time. He didn't say yes, but he didn't throw it away either. That night, Ellie found him standing in the hallway again, looking at that same wall with the dog tag and crayon tree. He turned as if to speak, but she beat him to it. It's okay if we just go for the hot dogs. And James laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. The gym smelled like floor wax and orange slices. James stood just inside the doorway, half occupied by parents shifting coats off their laps and waving at children already running toward them. The noise was all bounce and echo, sneakers, laughter, a whistle blown too sharp by a volunteer in a red shirt. James hadn't worn the right kind of clothes. His flannel was too heavy. His jeans still had the edge of old dust in the creases. But Ellie had asked him to come, not with words, just with that hopeful pause as she slid the flyer toward him 2 weeks ago. So he came. Ellie was across the room now, at the arts and crafts table, cutting paper with the kind of focus that made her tongue stick out slightly from the corner of her mouth. She hadn't seen him yet. James exhaled slowly and made his way toward the back. That was something. He folded his hands in his lap and stared ahead. A man a few rows up wore a shirt that said Coach Dad. Another had a toddler in his arms, drooling onto his collarbone like it was the most natural thing in the world. James had seen men cradle rifles with more nervousness than these men held their kids. He wasn't jealous. Not exactly. Just unfamiliar. Like watching a language you never learned but always wanted to speak. James! The voice came soft. A woman, mid-40s maybe, hair up in a messy bun, badge on a lanyard. Staff. Probably. I'm Susan, she said. Ellie's counselor. James rose automatically. Too fast. His knee flinched. She smiled without pity. She talks about you, you know, Susan said. Says you're quiet. But safe. He didn't know what to say to that. So he nodded. The kind of nod that says, I don't deserve that, but thank you anyway. They sat together in silence for a moment. Then Susan pointed across the room. That's Ellie's art. They asked the kids to draw what home feels like. James looked. It was scribbled in marker, off-centered and clumsy. But there it was. A house with a crooked roof. A dog with no tail. A porch swing with two stick figures. One tall, one small, both smiling. He looked away quickly, pretending to rub something from his eye. Later, when the group moved outside for sack races and bubble wands, James stayed back. Watched from under the shade of the bleachers. Ellie waved at him from the field, covered in grass stains, her shoes half off, laughing with a kid named Marcus. He waved back. One folding chair, one picture on a wall, and the decision to stay, even when you don't know how to belong. The field had thinned out. Plastic cones lay tipped over in the wind. A paper plate rolled across the grass like a lost thought. Most of the parents had started to leave, brushing crumbs off their jeans, scooping backpacks off the ground. Ellie stayed. She sat alone now, legs crossed on a red and white blanket. A juice box beside her, untouched. She was looking down at something in her lap. A sketchbook, maybe, or just the air, and said, you can sit here, if you want. He sat, not close, but not too far. The grass beneath him was damp. The blanket smelled like crayons and sunscreen. A softness he hadn't earned, but was allowed to borrow. Neither of them spoke for a while. She kept drawing, whatever it was. He kept glancing at the sky like it held some answer he hadn't found yet. A breeze passed between them. Then, gently, Ellie leaned just a little to the side. Not enough to touch. Just enough to say, I'm here. And James stayed. I thought you weren't going to come. She said finally. Her voice was flat. Not sad. Just honest. He cleared his throat. I almost didn't, he said. But I didn't want to wonder what it would have felt like. At the string still held in a child's hand who hadn't realized it was stuck. It was loud, he said, and then too quiet. She nodded again. That was enough. After a moment, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a granola bar. Broken in half. Held it out. He took it. Didn't say thank you, but chewed slowly like it mattered. And it did. The sun was getting low now, casting long shadows across the field. Most of the other kids were gone. A few parents still lingered, chatting in soft tones. But nobody paid attention to James and Ellie. That was a gift. Not being noticed. Not being asked to prove anything, just being allowed to be. Before they left, Ellie said, you don't have to do big stuff. James tilted his head. You don't have to be like the other dads, she added. You just have to stay. Stay. That word didn't used to mean much to him. Orders changed. Deployments came. People left, sometimes in planes, sometimes in coffins, sometimes in ways even quieter. But now it felt like the hardest and most important thing. So he answered the only way he could. I'll try. And she smiled. Not wide. Just enough to make the corner of her eye crease like it used to when she was 5 and told him her stuffed turtle could talk. They stood. She slipped her hand into his. And together, with no medals, no flags, no fanfare, they walked back toward the school building. Just a man and a girl. Both carrying scars no one could see. Both deciding to stay. The house was painted yellow now. It used to be gray, the kind of color that made you think of winter mornings and coffee left too long on the stove. But now it was yellow. But her eyes were the same, sharp, clear, and too kind for what she carried. Ma'am, he said. They looked at each other. Then she stepped aside and said, come in. I made tea. The kitchen smelled like lemon and thyme. Old photographs lined the wall above the radiator. One of Elliot's 7, wearing a paper crown. One of Nora's late husband in his uniform. Just the way he used to drink it back when Ellie was small, and he'd drop her off at this house on the way to base. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said gently. James looked down at his hands. Calloused. Still trembling a little. Always trembling. I should have come years ago. She didn't nod. Didn't say it's okay. She just sipped her tea and waited. So he tried again. You raised her, he said. Nora blinked slowly. I helped. No, James said. You raised her. There it was. Not apology. Not praise. Just truth. She knew what kind of soup she liked, he continued. She knew how to read bedtime stories out loud with voices. I didn't teach her that. No, but you taught her other things, Nora said. He shook his head. I wasn't even there. You came back. That sentence. So simple. So loaded. You came back. Like that erased everything before. Like that made up for birthday candles missed, tears dried by someone else's hands. School plays applauded by a substitute seat in the second row. But James didn't argue, because maybe, just maybe, coming back didn't matter. Maybe it wasn't everything, but maybe it was something. I used to get so angry at you, she said suddenly. Not cruel, just honest. James looked at her. I deserved it. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know what war does to people. She nodded once. So am I. The clock ticked above the sink. Outside, a truck passed. The wind chimes sang. Then Nora reached across the table and placed a worn envelope in front of him. I kept this, she said. He opened it slowly. A drawing. Crayon. Faded. A child's handwriting at the top. Me and Daddy and Miss Nora. 3 stick figures. One in a uniform. One with curly hair. One small and smiling in the middle. She never forgot you, Nora said, even when she stopped saying it out loud. James felt something unspool inside his chest. Quiet and heavy. Before he left, she walked him to the door. You did good, she said. She's okay. You're doing good. He didn't believe it yet, but it felt like something to hold on to. He reached into his pocket and handed her the folded note. The one he wrote at 2 a.m. The one he thought he might burn. She took it, didn't read it right away. Just said, thank you. And he said, no, thank you. As he stepped off the porch, she called after him. James! He turned. You can stop waiting now. It's okay to live. He nodded once. Not to her. Not to the sky. To himself. And as he walked back to his truck, the porch light stayed on behind him. Just in case. James had no idea how to pitch the damn thing. The tent lay in a stubborn heap of nylon and bent poles while Ellie sat on a log, arms crossed, trying not to smile. You sure you've done this before? She asked. Camped? Yeah. Tents? No. He muttered, holding up a half-folded instruction sheet, like it was a battlefield map. She shrugged. We could just sleep in the truck. He shook his head. Nope. We're doing this the real way. So they did. Badly. It took them over an hour. A few curse words under his breath. One pinched finger. And a lot of trial and error. But when the sun started bleeding orange across the trees, the tent stood up, crooked, but proud. Ellie clapped twice. It's not terrible. High praise, he said, and smiled. Dinner was 2 slightly burned pancakes cooked on a camping stove that sputtered like it had asthma. He brought maple syrup in a glass jar, because real syrup matters. And Ellie agreed, even if they ate sitting cross-legged on a plastic tarp, swatting at mosquitoes. This is better than school cafeteria food, she said, mouth full. Low bar, he said, but it felt good. The silence between them wasn't heavy tonight. It was warm, like a blanket someone else had already broken in. After eating, she wandered to the edge of the trees, found 2 flat rocks, and came back with a new idea. We're going to make pancake coins, she said, pressing a sticky syrup-covered rock onto the pan, pretending it was treasure. He played along. James sat just outside the tent, back against the tree. The fire had gone out. Only embers left, glowing like soft memories. He stared up at the trees, the stars, the kind of sky you don't see from a backyard. For once, there was no hum of generators, no voices on radios, just insects and wind and the occasional sound of Ellie turning in her sleep. He let it be quiet. In the morning, they woke up to rain. Not heavy, just a steady patter on the tent roof. Ellie blinked awake, hair frizzy, eyes still half closed. We didn't get wet. She mumbled. Nope, James said. Tent held up. She smiled. That smile, small, sleepy, genuine, made every bruised knuckle and mosquito bite worth it. They stayed there a while, neither getting up, just lying in their bags, listening. After a minute, she rolled toward him. Can we do this again sometime? James nodded. Anytime you want. They packed up slow. No ruse. James let her fold the tarp. Her way, not the right way. On the ride home, she put her feet up on the dash, windows cracked, letting the pine air in. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Later that evening, after dropping her off at Nora's, James sat in his truck for a while before starting the engine. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps. Hesitant. He pulled on a t-shirt, barefoot, on cold tile. Didn't bother with socks. Another knock. When he opened the door, Ellie stood there. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Hoodie too big. Sneakers muddy like she'd walked a while. In one hand, she held a bag of Skittles. In the other, nothing. Just clenched fingers. Hey, she said. Then up again, I was in a text. But I didn't want to make it weird. It's not weird. She raised an eyebrow. It's a little weird. He chuckled once. Yeah. Ellie looked over her shoulder like she expected someone to follow, but no one was there. Can I stay here for a few days? James blinked. Sure. I mean, yeah, of course. No questions. Not now. She stepped inside. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old flannel. She looked around like it was both familiar and new. I forgot how quiet it is here. He nodded. It stays that way. She dropped the bag near the couch. I brought candy. Emergency supply. Something like that. She plopped onto the couch and kicked off her shoes. Socks had holes in the toes. Until she asked, what happened to the picture that was on that wall? He looked up. The one of you and Mom. At the lake. He took a long breath. Fell off the nail a while back. Glass shattered. I meant to replace it. Ellie didn't push. Just nodded. James watched her over the rim of his cup. There was something softer about her now. Still guarded, but less sharp. So, she started. She found one of his flannel shirts in a laundry room and pulled it on like armor. They watched a movie they didn't finish. She curled up under an old quilt. He left the hall light on. And when he went to bed, he paused by the living room. She was asleep, the candy bag half open, her hand resting on the remote. He didn't tuck her in. She wasn't 5 anymore. But he folded a blanket at her feet, just in case she got cold. Then he whispered, not to wake her, not even sure why, I missed you, kiddo, and walked away before the lump in his throat got any heavier. The house was still dark when the floor creaked. James blinked awake, the kind of light sleep you never really shake after 40, and listened. Soft footsteps. The sound of a cabinet opening too carefully, like someone wasn't sure if they were allowed. He didn't move, just laid there, letting the sounds wrap around him like a blanket. The fridge door opened. Closed. A pan placed gently on the stove. Not slammed. Just placed. Then the smell. Eggs. Not fancy ones. No herbs. No bater. Just eggs the way you make them when you're trying, but not sure what for. James sat up, ran a hand through his hair, pulled on the same pair of jeans from yesterday, and patted down the hallway. She didn't see him at first. Ellie stood by the stove in that old flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled halfway. Her hair was a mess, and she had one sock on, the other somewhere lost to the couch, probably. She had the spatula in her right hand, moving it slowly like she was afraid of breaking something. He leaned on the doorframe. She glanced over. I didn't know if you still ate eggs. Eat dough. Scrambled okay? They're perfect. She scooped them out, divided them between 2 mismatched plates. No toast. No fancy fruit. Just 2 plates of eggs. James grabbed 2 forks and a pair of napkins. They sat down at the small table. The one with the water stain from that time she spilled grape juice when she was 7. She looked at it, and he saw her mouth twitch like maybe the memory still lived somewhere close. I use salt, she said. Bold move. They both smirked. They ate. No music. No TV. Just forks and quiet. Halfway through, she paused. I slept better than I have in months. He didn't say anything. Just nodded. She pushed the last of the eggs around the plate. It's not just a few days. I mean, I don't know how long, but I needed somewhere that wasn't what I was pretending to be okay in. I get that, he said. You don't have to rush. Her eyes went glassy for a second, but she blinked it away. Then, softer, I miss the way this house smells. James chuckled. Like old books and laundry soap? And lemon. Always lemon. I guess I've got a type. She picked up her plate and his. Washed them without asking. Left them in the rack, dripping. As she dried her hands, she said without turning, Do you think we can fix it? Me and you. He stood behind her, far enough not to crowd her, close enough to mean it. We're already fixing it. She nodded once. And that was that. No who. No tiri reunion. Just a clean plate. And eggs that weren't burned. And a girl who came home without having to say the words. It had been sitting there all along. 3rd shelf. Right side of the living room, behind a stack of paperbacks no one had touched in years. James found it while dusting, though dusting was just the excuse. He wasn't sure what he was really looking for. Maybe a thread to the man he used to be, or maybe just something to do with his hands now that Ellie was sleeping under his roof again. That album hadn't been opened since before deployment. Maybe even longer. He placed it on the coffee table, poured himself a cup of black coffee. He remembered the sound of it, like wind chimes and running water. Page 2. Ellie at 8. Her arm wrapped around a golden retriever named Max who only lived 3 years, but loved like 100. Her cheeks were freckled from too much sun. She was missing a front tooth. James smiled, the kind that hurts a little on the inside. He turned the page slowly, like the paper might tear if he rushed. Ellie at 10, standing in front of the house holding a cardboard sign that said, Welcome home, Dad. in blue crayon. That was the first time he came back from overseas. He remembered how tightly she hugged his leg and wouldn't let go until he promised to take her to the zoo. He hadn't kept that promise. The base called him in 3 days later. He ran his fingers over her face in the photo, as if he could fix it, not the picture, but the moment. He didn't hear her footsteps until she sat beside him, one knee tucked under, hair still wet from the shower. She didn't say anything, just looked at the album. He didn't close it, didn't hide it. Page 4. A birthday cake. 9 candles. Ellie's mom still in the picture. Still smiling. Still calling James Jimmy, like she was holding on to something slipping too fast. Page 5. Empty. A blank plastic sleeve, where a picture had been. Ellie placed a finger on it. That one ripped, she said quietly. I cried. You taped it back and told me not everything broken has to stay that way. He let the silence stretch, slow and warm. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I hated you for a while, she whispered, for not being there. I know. I thought if I ignored it, it'd go away. But it just got louder. I know that. 2. She turned the page. More pictures. Her high school graduation. James wasn't there. She didn't need to say it. The empty space beside her in the cap and gown photo said enough. Still, she pointed to it. That's when I realized I couldn't keep waiting for people to show up. James swallowed. The coffee had gone cold in his hands. But I'm here now, she added, barely audible. And you're here, so maybe we try again. From this page on. She looked up at him. If you want. He nodded. Yeah, I want. They didn't hug. Didn't cry. They just turned to the next page, blank again, and sat in that quiet that wasn't quite lonely anymore. And outside, the wind rustled the oak leaves like an old dog settling in. They were sitting outside on the back porch. The sun had just dipped below the edge of the cornfield, casting everything in that kind of gold that makes silence feel sacred. James had made tea, not because he liked it, but because Ellie did. She drank hers with a splash of honey. He drank his straight, like everything else in his life. The porch creaked under their chairs. A soft breeze moved through the tall grass. The sky above was the color of old denim. That's when she asked it. Do you ever regret it? James didn't answer right away. He took a sip, let the question settle between them like dust on an old uniform. You mean the army? Ellie nodded. All of it. The years. What it took from us. He leaned back, eyes scanning the yard like the answer might be hiding in a rusted fence or the tire swing she hadn't touched since she was 10. I don't regret serving, he said slowly. There were boys who didn't make it back, and I carry them every day. Ellie looked down at her tea. But I regret the birthdays, he added. The nights you cried, and I wasn't there. The way your voice got quieter on the phone, the longer I stayed gone. She didn't speak. I regret thinking I had more time, he said. That you'd still be little when I got back. That nothing would change. Ellie's throat tightened. She watched a moth dance near the porch light, silent and aimless. I try to make peace with it, she said finally. Told myself you were being noble, that you were doing something bigger than us. She laughed, soft and bitter. But when you're 10, noble doesn't mean a damn thing. You just want your dad at the science fair. James nodded. She took a long breath. So what do we do now? We start where we are, he said. Not with guilt, not with pretending. Just here. You and me. This porch. This tea. Ellie looked at him. Really looked. Like maybe for the first time in years. And if I'm still mad sometimes? She asked. Then you tell me, he said. And I'll stay. I won't run. A few seconds passed. Then she whispered, okay. James didn't smile. He just reached out, placed his rough hand over hers. It was small. That gesture. But it held. Behind them, the house creaked like it always did when the night cooled. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere. It ends in a shared cup of tea. In the way a father says, I won't run. And in the way a daughter finally believes him. This story wasn't about medals or victories. It was about the slow return of trust. The kind that doesn't knock. The kind that sits beside you in silence and stays. Because somewhere out there, someone else is waiting for a porch light to come on. And your story might just be the one that helps them believe it still can.